Now I have the full transcript. Let me write the new story. Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. My name is Vivienne, and the night my son was fighting for his life in a pediatric ICU in Cincinnati, my husband's mother looked me dead in the eye and said, "Maybe God is just correcting a mistake." His father nodded. My husband said nothing. I said nothing either. But behind that silence, I was already building the case that would take everything they thought was theirs. Want to know how it ends? Before we get there, where are you listening from right now? What time is it where you are? Drop it in the comments. I genuinely read them all. I hadn't slept in 36 hours. The pediatric ICU at Cincinnati Children's had a particular kind of quiet. Not peaceful, just held. Like the whole floor was collectively deciding not to breathe too hard. The lights were kept low. The monitors beeped in soft intervals. The smell of antiseptic had long since stopped registering in my nose because it had become the smell of the place where my son was still alive, and that made it almost sacred. Noah was 7. He looked younger under the hospital blanket, smaller than any 7-year-old should look. His dark hair was matted against the pillow, and the oxygen cannula sat at an awkward angle on his face. I'd fix it every hour when the nurses weren't watching. It was the only thing I felt capable of fixing. I kept one hand resting near his wrist, close enough to feel warmth without disturbing the IV line. I'd read somewhere that sick children can still sense presence even when they're not conscious. I didn't know if it was true, but I couldn't risk being wrong. My phone was face down on the chair. I'd stopped checking it 3 hours ago after my mother-in-law Patricia sent a message at 2 a.m. that I couldn't unread. These medical bills aren't something we budgeted for. You need to figure out your portion. I'd stared at it for a long time. Then I'd turned the phone over. Just after 5 in the morning, it buzzed again. I answered without looking. "Vivienne." Patricia's voice was clipped, brisk, like she was calling about a scheduling conflict. "We've been talking as a family. Daniel agrees that the financial burden here is unsustainable. The hospital is suggesting a care coordinator. You should let them take over decision-making." I didn't speak. "Are you even listening to me? You've been there 4 days. You're running on fumes. You're not thinking clearly." Behind her, I heard my father-in-law, Gerald, say something in a low voice. Patricia repeated it without lowering hers. "Gerald says if the boy doesn't improve by the end of the week, we should discuss palliative options. He's been a drain on Daniel since he was born. And honestly, Vivienne, you need to start thinking about your husband's future, not just your son's." I hung up. I didn't cry. I looked at Noah. His chest rose and fell, steady and stubborn and miraculous. From the pocket of my cardigan, I pulled out something small, a worn red Matchbox car. Hot Wheels, the kind he collected. This one a beat-up little Camaro he called the fast one. He'd pressed it into my hand the morning of his second hospitalization and said, "Keep it so I know you'll come back." I set it gently on the pillow beside his ear. "So you know I'm still here, buddy," even when I can't say it out loud. A nurse came in around 6. 20s, soft-spoken, the kind of tired that comes from caring too much. "Ms. Alderman, can I get you anything? There's coffee at the station." "I'm okay. Thank you." She looked at me the way nurses do when they've been watching someone all night and have noticed more than they've said. After she left, I sat back and let my eyes close for exactly 1 minute. Not to rest, to remember. 3 nights earlier, I'd been sitting across from Patricia at a dinner she'd arranged at their house in Indian Hill, the kind of neighborhood where the driveways are longer than most people's yards. She'd called it a family check-in. I brought a container of Noah's favorite mac and cheese because I didn't know what else to bring to a house that had never felt like it had room for me. Patricia took the container and set it on the kitchen counter without opening it. "I had the chef make something," she said. The dining room was set for 4, Patricia, Gerald, my husband Daniel, and me. No high chair. No child-size plates. No acknowledgement that Noah existed in the architecture of their lives. Gerald led grace. He thanked God for health, wealth, and family loyalty. I kept my eyes open. They waited until the salad course. "We've been reviewing the medical expenses," Patricia began. reaching into the slim leather folder she'd placed by her fork. Gerald and I have covered a substantial portion out of goodwill. But the projected costs going forward, she slid a printout toward me. They're not something we can continue to absorb. I looked at the paper. Noah's hospital statements, highlighted in yellow. These bills are in our names, I said. Some are. Others are joint. She folded her hands. We think it would be appropriate for you to explore other resources. Your side of the family, perhaps. My parents died when I was 23. You were at the funeral. A tiny shrug. The kind that means I know, but that's your problem. Friends, then. A fundraiser. People do those things. I looked at Daniel. He was cutting his steak with careful precision, eyes down. Daniel, I said quietly. He looked up. Just for a second. Then back down. Gerald cleared his throat. We raise Daniel to build a future, not to spend it managing a situation that's unlikely to improve. I set my fork down. Noah has leukemia. He's in remission protocol. It will improve. Vivienne. Patricia's voice went silky. We just want what's best for our son. Surely you understand that. I stood up. My chair scraped the hardwood. I picked up my purse, left the mac and cheese on their marble counter, and walked out through the front door and down that long driveway without looking back. The drive home took 40 minutes. I pulled into a gas station parking lot halfway there and sat with the engine running, hands on the wheel, staring at the fluorescent glow of a Sunoco sign. I wasn't crying. I was thinking. From my bag, I pulled out a manila folder I'd been carrying for months. On the tab, I'd written 2 words in pencil, just in case. Inside were documents, account statements, an LLC registered in my name before Daniel and I married, and paperwork tied to a small inheritance from my aunt that no one in Daniel's family knew existed. I'd never mentioned it because Patricia had a way of treating information like ammunition, and I'd sensed early on that she was the type who collected it. I opened the folder in the gas station parking lot at 11:30 at night and started reading. I'd been quietly building something since before Noah got sick. I hadn't known exactly why at the time. Instinct, maybe. The creeping sense that the warmth in this family had an expiration date. Now I knew why. I drove home. I didn't sleep. 2 days later, I was back at the hospital feeding Noah small spoonfuls of applesauce, his request. When I heard the door open, I thought it was his nurse. It was Daniel. He didn't look at Noah first. He looked at his phone, finished a text, then glanced toward the bed. Hey, buddy, he said, but his eyes were already drifting toward the window. I kept feeding Noah. After a few minutes, Daniel stepped into the small bathroom attached to the room. He didn't close the door all the way. I heard him before I understood what I was hearing. She doesn't have anything, Mom. No family money, nothing. She married up and she knows it. Whatever she's doing with the lawyers is just posturing. A pause. Yeah, I know. But if we can get the hospital to flag her as emotionally volatile, we can request a competency review. That gives us grounds. I set the spoon down. Noah looked at me. He was 7, not stupid. Is Daddy in trouble? He whispered. No, baby, I said. Keep eating. I walked to the bathroom doorway. Daniel turned and saw me. The color in his face shifted, but he didn't hang up. He just lowered the phone slowly. You told your mother I married up, I said. A beat. It's just a phrase. You're planning a competency review. He ran a hand through his hair. Vivienne, you're exhausted. You're not hearing things right. I heard you fine. He stepped past me and went to the window. When he finally spoke again, his voice was quiet and certain, the way people sound when they've decided something long before the conversation started. My family has resources you don't. That's not an insult, it's a fact. And when it comes to what's best for Noah going forward, stop. He stopped. He is not a negotiating point, I said. He is a child. He is our child. And right now, he's eating applesauce and listening to every word you're saying. Daniel looked toward the bed. Noah had gone very still, the spoon hovering near his mouth. Daniel left 20 minutes later. He said he had a meeting. I sat back down next to Noah and picked up the spoon. "You okay?" I asked. "Is the fast one still safe?" he asked. He meant the Matchbox car. "Right here," I said, touching my pocket. He nodded. That was enough. That night, back at the extended stay apartment I'd been renting 5 minutes from the hospital, because I wasn't going home, not anymore, I plugged in my laptop and opened Daniel's email. We'd shared an account once, years ago, for household bills. He'd never removed my access. I'd never mentioned I still had it. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I found everything. 3 months of messages between Daniel, Patricia, and Gerald, and a family attorney I'd never heard of. The subject lines were practical and cold. Noah situation, long-term planning. Vivienne's standing. I read them in order. The oldest one from Patricia read, "She was never the right fit. If Noah's prognosis worsens, we should discuss how to position Daniel for a clean exit. The less entangled, the better." Gerald, 2 weeks later, agreed. "Check with Marcus on what grounds would hold up in Ohio family court." Daniel, 1 week after that, "She's devoted to the kid, but that actually works in our favor. She'll push back on every decision and we can use that." I sat in the kitchen of a rented apartment with the kind of furniture that's been wiped down too many times, and I read every single one. My hands weren't shaking. I don't know why I expected them to. Maybe because I'd already known. Not in the explicit way, not the emails, not the attorney, but in the way you know things you're not ready to see. The dinners where Patricia spoke around me. The estate planning meeting years ago where my name appeared and then quietly disappeared from a document. The way Daniel had stopped touching my shoulder in social situations like he was rehearsing distance. I took screenshots of everything. Then I called my attorney. Her name was Meredith Cho. I'd hired her 6 months earlier when Noah was first diagnosed, and I'd started thinking clearly about what protection looked like. I told her what I'd found. She was quiet for a long moment. "Forward me everything," she said. "And don't touch the account again. We have what we need." The emergency custody petition arrived 2 days later. A process server knocked on my apartment door at 7:15 in the morning. I signed for it in my pajamas, set it on the counter, and made coffee. The petition cited emotional instability, erratic decision-making, inability to maintain a stable home environment. It asked the court to award temporary guardianship to Daniel, with Patricia and Gerald listed as secondary custodians. I read it twice, then I folded it back into the envelope and placed it beside my own folder. The courthouse in downtown Cincinnati was the kind of building that announces itself. Granite steps, heavy doors, American flag standing very still in the cold November air. I arrived 15 minutes early. Meredith had told me to arrive on time. I came early because I needed a moment to sit in the hallway and remember that I was allowed to be there. I carried Noah's Matchbox car in my coat pocket. Small, dumb ritual. It helped. They came in together. Daniel, Patricia, Gerald, and the young attorney in a slate gray suit I didn't recognize. They occupied one side of the courtroom with the ease of people who expect institutions to work in their favor. Patricia didn't look at me. Gerald straightened his cufflinks. Daniel checked his phone twice before the bailiff told him to put it away. Meredith sat beside me. She had one folder. She didn't open it until she needed to. The opposing attorney went first. She was skilled, smooth, concerned, the kind of professional empathy that sounds real until you notice. It never breaks for actual feeling. She described me as overwhelmed, reactive, and emotionally volatile. She cited my decision to relocate to an extended stay apartment as evidence of instability. She called my attorney contact a sign of adversarial escalation. She made my entire life as Noah's mother sound like a symptom. I looked at my hands. Still. Meredith stood slowly. "Your Honor, the petitioners have characterized my client as unstable. I'd like to submit the following documentation." She placed a packet on the table. Hospital attendance logs, every single night for 4 weeks, initialed by nursing staff. Medical consultation records showing I was present for every physician update. A letter from Noah's oncologist, Dr. Weston, stating that I was the only parent who had attended all 14 specialist meetings. and signed discharge consent forms from Noah's first ICU admission, my signature, time-stamped, filed, because I was the only one who showed up. She paused, then she pulled out her phone and set it on the table. I'd also like the court to hear this recording, captured at Cincinnati Children's Hospital 2 days ago in the pediatric ICU. Both parties were present. She pressed play. Daniel's voice: "If we get the psychiatrist to document that she's overwhelmed, the court will revisit the dismissal." Patricia's voice: "Good. Play the long game. Get Noah away from her permanently." The courtroom didn't gasp. It just went very, very quiet. The kind of quiet that means people are recalibrating. Daniel's attorney stood. "Your Honor, that recording." The judge raised one hand. He was older, heavy-set, with reading glasses that he removed slowly and set on the bench in front of him. He looked at the paperwork for a full minute. Then he looked at Daniel. "This petition is dismissed, with prejudice." He said it without theater. What I'm reading here and what I'm hearing on that recording indicates not a concern for the child's welfare, but a coordinated effort to remove the child's primary caregiver for reasons that have nothing to do with parenting fitness. He looked over his glasses at Daniel's attorney. "I'll be flagging this for the Family Court Oversight Board. If I see this family back in my courtroom on the same grounds, I will treat it as contempt." He didn't slam his gavel. He just set it down. Outside on the courthouse steps, the air was cold and clean. I stood there for a minute, hands in my pockets, fingers finding the matchbox car. My phone buzzed. A notification from Cincinnati Children's. Noah's afternoon labs were back. Numbers were trending in the right direction. I exhaled. I didn't cry on those steps. I'd done that already, in the gas station parking lot and in the hospital bathroom with the door locked at 3 a.m., and once in my car in the hospital garage after a particularly bad prognosis meeting when I sat there for 40 minutes before I trusted myself to drive. I'd done the crying in private, where no one could call it erratic. Meredith appeared beside me, buttoning her coat. "It's not over," she said. "He may appeal." "I know. But today was a significant win." "I know that too." She left. I stood there a few minutes longer, watching the city move around the courthouse, buses and pigeons and people with their own invisible crises tucked under their arms. Then I took the matchbox car out of my pocket. The fast one. I held it in my palm. Cheap red paint chipped at the roof. A tiny crack in the windshield that had been there since Noah dropped it off the porch last summer. He'd cried about that crack like it was a real car, and I'd held him and said, "Buddy, the cracks are just where it's been." He'd looked at me like that was the wisest thing he'd ever heard. I slipped it back into my pocket and walked to my car. 3 weeks passed. Daniel did not appeal. His attorney, I later learned, withdrew from the case. Gerald sent one email through a mutual contact suggesting we discuss a reasonable resolution. I forwarded it to Meredith and didn't respond. Patricia sent nothing. Noah came home on a Tuesday, not fully recovered, not finished with treatment, but stable enough, strong enough. Home. We moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Hyde Park with a small balcony where I immediately put 2 folding chairs and a bird feeder because Noah had decided he was interested in birds. He chose blue for his room. We painted it together on a Saturday, badly, with drips along the baseboard that we both agreed to leave. The settlement came through in the divorce proceedings 8 weeks later. I'd expected to fight for every dollar. I didn't have to. When your estranged husband's family has left a digital paper trail suggesting a coordinated plan to remove you from your child's life, negotiations tend to go differently. I didn't touch the money for 2 weeks. When I did, I opened a savings account for Noah's future medical costs and put the bulk of it there. Then I made one more decision. I started a private Facebook group for mothers of chronically ill children who'd experienced family isolation during a medical crisis. I called it Still in the Room. I wrote one post introducing myself, briefly, without details, just enough. If you've ever been told you're too emotional while your child was fighting for their life, this group is for you. By the end of the first week, 43 women had joined. By the end of the month, 2/17, on a Thursday evening in February, when the sky went that particular shade of cold gray that Cincinnati saves for winter, I was sitting beside Noah's bed reading to him. He'd fallen asleep somewhere around page 4, which was par for the course. I kept reading anyway. When I finally closed the book, I noticed he'd fallen asleep holding the Matchbox car. I'd given it back to him when he came home. He'd looked at it for a long moment and then said, "You kept it the whole time." "The whole time," I'd said. He'd nodded, satisfied, like that confirmed something important about the nature of the world. I reached over and carefully uncurled his fingers, took the car, and set it on the nightstand where he'd see it first thing in the morning. Then I went to the kitchen and poured a glass of water and stood at the window looking out at the parking lot below, ordinary and lit up yellow under the streetlights. I thought about Patricia's voice on the phone that early morning in the ICU. Maybe God is just correcting a mistake. I thought about the way Daniel had stood at the hospital window and talked about Noah's future like he was managing a liability. I thought about Gerald at that dinner table and the envelope with the highlighted bills and the email chain I'd read in a rented apartment at midnight. And then I thought about Noah asleep in the next room with his chipped red car and his blue walls and his bird feeder on the balcony and the way he'd said last week, "Mom, I think the cardinal comes because he likes us." I'd said, "I think you're right." I hadn't screamed. I hadn't begged. I hadn't spent a single night wondering if I was enough, because I knew, not because anyone told me, but because I had stayed every time it would have been easier to leave. That was the whole story. I finished my water, rinsed the glass, and went to bed. I've thought a lot about what actually happened, not just the courtroom, not the dismissed petition, not even the recording that silenced a room full of people who thought they were untouchable. I mean what actually happened, underneath all of it. Patricia didn't lose because I outmaneuvered her legally, though I did. Gerald didn't lose because a judge reprimanded him, though that happened too. They lost because of something much simpler and much older than any courtroom strategy. They chose, consistently and deliberately, to treat a child like a liability and a mother like an obstacle, and those choices accumulated. Every cold email, every highlighted bill slid across a dinner table. Every whispered hallway conversation they assumed I'd never hear. Each one was a small decision that felt consequence-free in the moment. None of them were. That's the thing about sustained cruelty. It leaves a trail. It doesn't disappear just because no one calls it out in real time. I didn't scream at Patricia when she said what she said on that phone call at 5 in the morning. I didn't confront Daniel when I heard him through the bathroom door. I didn't throw anything or demand explanations I already knew the answers to. I just listened. I documented. I held Noah's hand and I paid attention, and eventually that attention became the only evidence I needed. I think about Vivienne, about myself at that gas station parking lot at midnight, sitting with a folder on my lap that I'd been quietly building without fully knowing why, and I recognize now what I was doing. I was trusting something in myself that I hadn't yet named. Not strategy exactly. More like the kind of clarity that comes when you've been watching a situation long enough to stop being surprised by it and start being ready for it. The intelligence that protected Noah wasn't brilliance. It was patience. It was the decision, over and over again, to stay in the room when everything in me wanted to leave. To show up to the meeting I dreaded, to sign the form at midnight, to return the next morning when the previous night had tried to break me. Resilience isn't dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It's mostly just the quiet act of continuing when stopping would have been so much easier. And the ethics of what I did, I've turned this over too. Was I ruthless? Maybe. I used the emails. I used the recording. I gave the court exactly what they needed to see who these people really were. But I didn't fabricate anything. I didn't exaggerate. I just stopped protecting them from the consequences of their own behavior. There's a difference between revenge and accountability, and the difference matters, not just legally, but to the person you have to be when it's all over. Noah doesn't need to grow up knowing all of it. But I hope he grows up knowing this, that someone stayed. That when it was inconvenient, when it was expensive, when it was exhausting and lonely and no one was applauding, someone stayed anyway. And that staying, not the settlement, not the dismissed petition, not any of it, that was the thing that actually mattered. I'm still learning to believe that's enough. Most days I do.